Alrighty, so a couple of days ago we did a live stream, and I sort of wanted to get the community's input on a lot of characters and stuff like that, so that way we could try to make a pretty decent tier list and sort of rank characters on whether or not they are good or useful or just, you know, whatever the case may be. So this is pretty much what we've come up with. It took me a lot longer to do this than I anticipated it, but there are quite a lot of characters in the game. There's almost 200 characters in the game at this point, because the game has been out for global. It's been about a year and a half. For, you know, JP Korea, it's been about 2 years. So yeah, we've got every character all the way up to Margaret, which is actually coming out in just a couple of days for me. I'm not sure exactly what day this is going to go up, so just be aware we did go ahead and put her on the tier list. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to, because she's not actually out and I haven't been able to mess with her, and you know, it's just going off of what the JP players and stuff like that are, you know, doing with her and everything like that. But I feel like they've got a pretty solid understanding of the character. So without further ado, let's kind of like take a broad look at this. I'm not going to go over like every single character or anything specifically. I just kind of want to make this sort of like maybe like a monthly thing where we can, you know, as a couple of new characters come out and everything, we can sort of get together and move characters up and down depending on whether they're more useful now or, you know, less useful now, and then add new characters to the list, etc. So yeah. Starting off, we have raid tier. I wanted to make this tier because I felt like there was a lot of characters that didn't really belong in the sort of like PvE or PvP section, kind of like they're good characters, but they're not really used for anything besides raids. The only characters that I'm specifically like not too sure I want in here are Zaratros and King, but the chat seems pretty, you know, pretty adamant on making sure that they were in the raid tier at least, because to be honest, they pretty much are only used in raids. Zaratros is basically just used for Belmoth raids. He can be used for certain event bosses and stuff like that, but normally it's nothing too crazy. So King is also a character that can be used outside of raids. Like, it's not like he's specifically for raids by any means, but he's just really not good for anything else. Like, there's much better characters that you would want to use instead of King in pretty much every other situation besides raids, and even then King is pretty outdated for raids as well. So yeah, we have all of these characters. I did put in a couple of these characters right here. So we have Halloween, it's not even Halloween, I think it's Valentine's Elaine, and then Jenna and Zaneri. They're basically just used for their costumes to get extra materials and stuff like that for raids. We have these two, and Green Demon Meliodas would be bundled with this Elizabeth and this Jericho, but they're basically just used for their outfits to summon demons. But I feel like Green Demon Meliodas is actually good enough to be on the tier list, so we didn't put him in raid tier. But yeah, the rest of these are pretty much only raid characters. In F, like, I just want a disclaimer. Sorry if any of the characters that you really like are on like a tier that you don't agree with, but it's not going off of, you know, just one person's, you know, experience with the character, or, you know, whatever the case may be there. So it's just broad sense, trying to be as objective about it as possible. A lot of these characters just really don't have use, and they're just bad characters. Unfortunately, all of the slime collab characters are in this bracket, which really sucks because they really don't deserve to be in there, but they're just not good. That was the first collaboration that they ever did for the game, and they just they ended up getting shafted. Their stats really aren't good. Their skills and kit really aren't good. They still can't be I don't think you can make UR gear for them either. Like, I still don't think that they've made it to where you can make UR gear. I could be wrong on that one, but they're just altogether very underwhelming as collaboration units. And yeah, Beatrice is also in here just because her kit is just really bad. Like, it's just unfortunately like all lifesteal based, which does work with her passive, but it's just not really what you would want on anything specific. D tier, we basically did anybody who has at least some sort of use. So a lot of these characters are, you know, very niche, basically just going to be used for one specific application, whether it be like a knighthood boss or, you know, a final boss they were good at or whatever the case may be. So like this Blue Valenti, for example, she was really, really good on, you know, final boss Ban, but for everything else in the game, she has been very, very bad. So she kind of earns a spot in the non-useless tier of F, just by being able to like be used in a final boss, I guess. But yeah, that's where a lot of the characters in this ranking are pretty much going to go. Can't really say much else about those. C tier, these are a lot of characters that either are just pretty lackluster in general or have sort of fallen off. Like Hauser, in my opinion, was a really, really great unit whenever the game launched. He was a really, really good farming unit and everything like that, but there's just much better options and stuff like that out there now. I don't think he's completely useless. You could probably still use him. But yeah, a lot of these characters are just pretty underwhelming. Either their stats are pretty low or their kit just isn't enough to really use in a specific application. The one exception may be this Green Frowndren, just because if you really pump him up with enough cosmetics and you get his ultimate level all the way up and everything like that, if you basically wail out on him and make him as good as he possibly could be, he's actually a pretty decent unit because you can get use out of his passive and it can help you out in a certain situation. You could potentially use him on like an assault melee team, but it just no one's even looking at him as an option anymore. Like, he's really just not, I just don't think he has enough, you know, use that you would even want to sort of pour those resources into him. B tier are characters that have a pretty decent amount of use, or maybe the characters have just fallen off a little bit. They're still pretty good in general. A lot of notable mentions here are Red Easton is very good on the Purgatory Bond team, but honestly, she's not really good for much more than that. But she's a decent character in general. She can cleanse, take off ultimate move gauge. Red Gloxenia is also a very interesting character that I feel like you can come up with some interesting team comps with. Green Derriere is really good for the Belmoth raid. I think she's considered to be like the best Belmoth raid like DPS unit, which is pretty cool. Green Jericho is also really good for Belmoth as well, but you know, she can still hold her own in other PvE applications. Blue King is crazily still pretty decent. Like, his kit in general is just really good. His passive kind of sucks, to be honest, because it only buffs other fairies, but you know, he's got a petrify, he's got a heal, etc. You know, he's just overall a pretty good character. So that's kind of what this whole tier is looking at. We tried to put any sort of sub-slot units that were halfway decent towards the end of the list. So you can see down here in C, we have, you know, like Jillian, for example, is a pretty good sub-slot unit. Aleone's a pretty good sub-slot unit. Blue Gilthunder is also a pretty good sub-slot unit. So we kind of tried to push sub-slot units towards the end of the list on the tier. So notable, you know, you've got down here, you've got this Red Liz who heals you up a little bit at the end of each turn. You've got Red Jericho who buffs strength units. You've got Blue Jericho who buffs speed units. You've got Athena who can take off ultimate move gauge as long as you know, kill one of the enemy's units. And then, yeah, other than that, really, that's pretty straightforward as far as the B tier goes. A tier are units that are pretty damn good and have a decent use to them. So a lot of the like really good sub-slot units and stuff like that are going to be pushed into this one, I think, just because like they might not be characters that you would use up front, but they're good enough to that you would want to put them in the back line because they, you know, either have a really, really good passive that helps you out or whatever the case may be. Most of the time it's the passive. But yeah, so like Death Pierce, Nanashi's really good for sub-slot. Rom is also very, very good for the Unknown team, which is very, you know, relevant in the higher tiers of PvP at the moment. So yeah, other characters, you know, you've got Executioner Zeldris, who is one of my personal favorite units. I think he is a little slept on. He's pretty underrated in a lot of situations, but he actually does pretty good. He's getting a buff soon, so I think he'll probably stay in A tier, I think. I don't think it'll necessarily buff him up all the way to S tier as far as the tier list goes, but you know, these are just good characters that are, you know, pretty applicable to a lot of different scenarios, whether or not it just be, you know, good at PvE or PvP. So yeah, and then we have S tier, which is these are the ones where we had a little bit you know, of a hard time determining where they were going to be on the list. The biggest mention here is Lostvayne Meliodas, the red Meliodas. It was pretty 50-50 on whether or not he should be in SS tier or high S tier. And a lot of people were saying that he probably deserves to be high S tier. I think that he's still really, really good in a lot of like situations. He can still be decent in PvP, even though he's not really used all that much. He's really great for PvE, like farming and, you know, etc. There's a good, like, you can use him for Night Boss or Knighthood boss Akumu, who he absolutely shreds with his ultimate. But the big factor is whether or not you have him maxed out. Obviously, that's the kind of, you know, the big deal with some of these characters. A lot of these characters could be way better if you actually had them maxed out. So if anything, we may end up moving Lostvayne, red Lostvayne, all the way down here, but really not that big of a deal. He's pretty much in the same spot either way. But yeah, we've just got S tier, which is really great units at the moment. People who can pretty much hold their own in PvP or are just really, really solid PvE units, such as Derriere, for example. She is really good for anything PvE related, basically. Estarossa is also god tier PvE. We have Arthur in here. I don't necessarily agree that Arthur is S tier. I honestly think that his attack card is a little lackluster, but his passive is so good with not only Bond, but any of the like human teams that you can make with him, that he's just really like substantial. Like he can really make a huge difference on the team. So he's pretty solid. I might end up moving him a little bit further down on the list, like next month or whenever we end up doing a little edit of this. But yeah, we've got a lot of the Archangels and stuff like that in these two tiers. But SS tier is pretty much as cut and dry as you would expect it to be. Escanor, I think, was the majority. Like, everybody can use Escanor in pretty much any application in the game. He just hits insanely hard. He's super, super good. We put Margaret right next to Bon. I asked the chat whether or not we wanted to put her on the left side or the right side of Bon to dignify whether or not she was good or like better or worse than Bon, and everybody seemed to agree that she was probably better than Bon, so we moved her up right here. Bon is also very, very good. He's very good in certain PvE applications, but he is a crazy overpowered unit when it comes to PvP. Like, his team is just like insanely annoying to go against. Just so dumb, so good. You know, it is what it is. I think Goddess Liz is probably the best support type character in the game. She can really be used for anything PvE or PvP related. You know, she can, you know, revive one unit, and just, she has a ton of use. Like, you can put the shield up, you can stun with her. She's just crazy. She's crazy good. Merlin, also very, very big damage. She can't be one-shotted or even two-shotted, which is a huge thing, because the meta is so crazy with just massive damage now that that's honestly like a really big factor for her. Green Gowther is just insanely good. You know, he's obviously a little bit better than the red Gowther, but it's a real bummer that he's like a seasonal unit and he doesn't come around all that often. So I don't know. I know a lot of players might not have him, especially if you're newer, but he's supposed to be on the QSAC banner, I guess, which is kind of disappointing because that's, you know, probably the Holy War Festival that people are the least excited about. So yeah, Sariel, honestly, insane, very, very good unit. He's pretty much good for anything. You can still use him in PvP today. He's like the absolute best farmer in the game just because of his like crazy crit damage and stuff like that with his AoE, and his single target is off the chain. So yeah, Assault Melee still really, really good depending on who you pair him with. Red Gowther's Red Gowther, both of them can rank up. It's very, very good. It's insane that Red Gowther has been, like, I would be willing to say that out of all of the characters in the game, Red Gowther has probably been in the meta the longest out of any unit in the game. Just because of, like, as soon as he came out, people were like, all right, he ranks up cards, he's on the team. And then people pretty much didn't take him off the team until Green Gowther came along, and even then, he's just literally like a replacement for him. So, I don't know. Then we already talked about Lostvayne, but that is pretty much the list. If you guys want to, you know, hang out sometime and help me go over the list, and maybe we'll revise it and mess around with it when new characters come out and everything like that, feel free to subscribe to the channel, stay tuned and everything like that. We'll end up doing probably another live stream at some point. I don't think the live streams are going to be nearly as long now that we have the actual, you know, list established, because it'll just be a couple of like moving around, figuring out where the characters go, etc. But it was a fun time. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys, you know, enjoyed. Let me know what your thoughts on some of the character placements are, like whether or not you agree with them, whether you disagree with them. Give me a reason why. Don't just say your list sucks. That doesn't do me any good. That's zero criticism. That's just you being dumb. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe for more content in the future. I'll see you guys in the next one.